Can you imagine writing a final letter to your loved ones, a last goodbye, but knowing deep down that they would never, ever get to read it? That's the absolutely heartbreaking story at the center of the book, The Unsent Last Wills. Today, we're going to dive into how these silence letters open up a really painful part of Taiwan's past and show us why this struggle for justice is still very much alive today, shaping the island's democracy. This quote, it just perfectly captures the spirit of this whole story, doesn't it? We're talking about a fight for justice that has stretched on for decades, a fight that just refuses to give up, even when things look incredibly bleak. It's a story about resilience, about standing up to a state that didn't just want to kill people, it wanted to completely erase them from memory. All right, so let's start with the heart of it all, these unsent letters. During a period in Taiwan known as the White Terror, which was nearly 4 decades of martial law and brutal political persecution under the Kuomintang, thousands of people were jailed or executed. And in their final moments, many of them wrote last wills. These were their final words of love, of defiance, but they wrote them knowing the state would almost certainly confiscate them. They knew their families would never see them. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some random act of cruelty or a bureaucratic mess-up. No, seizing those letters was a deliberate strategy. The government wasn't just taking a life, it was aiming for something called relationship erasure. The whole point was to cut off that final human connection, to stop a person's memory from being passed down to their kids, to their spouse. It was, in a way, a method of killing them twice by erasing them from the lives of everyone who loved them. You see, the state's goal was to make these people just vanish from history, to make their memory thin and blurry, as the book says. By stealing their last words, the government tried to deny them their place in their own family's story. And that is exactly why finding these letters today is so much more than just a history lesson. It's a powerful act of resistance. It's the first step in reclaiming a truth that was buried on purpose. So this strategy of erasure wasn't some abstract government policy. It had real, devastating consequences for human beings. The fear, the silence, it seeped into the most intimate parts of family life, and it created a kind of trauma that would echo down through generations. The government's surveillance was so pervasive, it forced families into a constant state of what you could call emotional censorship. People had to police their own words, their own feelings, terrified that any expression of love or grief could be twisted and used against them. The story of a woman named Shiyu Sha is just a gut-wrenching example of how deep this control really went. So Shi Wixia's native tongue was likely Japanese, but writing in it was forbidding. Her husband, who was in prison, actually had to warn her in his letters not to use it, forcing her to struggle with Chinese just to write words that could get past the prison censors. I mean, just think about that for a second. The very language of her heart was considered a threat. Well, after he was executed, something inside her just shattered. The source material says she sealed her lips and spoke no more. The trauma literally stole her voice. It's one of the most profound examples of silencing you can imagine. So when you take that kind of deep, personal trauma and you multiply it by thousands and thousands of people, it raises a huge question, right? How does an entire country even start to heal from that? And this brings us to the official process for dealing with this kind of past, something called transitional justice. Now, all around the world, transitional justice is generally seen as having these 5 pillars. First, you seek the truth of what really happened. Then you hold the perpetrators accountable. You provide reparations to help the victims. You create memorials so nobody forgets. And finally, you reform the institutions so that it can never, ever happen again. Together, these are supposed to be the roadmap to healing. But, and this is a huge but, this is where we run into the central, glaring paradox of Taiwan's whole approach. Because while it's made some progress here and there, one of these pillars has been almost totally ignored, leaving the entire foundation for justice feeling shaky. So just take another look at those 5 pillars: truth, accountability, reparations, memorialization, and reform. Which one do you think has been the most politically charged, the hardest to deal with, and the one that's been mostly left behind in Taiwan's journey? If you guessed accountability, you are absolutely right. As you can see from this table, Taiwan has made some real efforts in other areas. There have been investigations, compensation funds have been set up, but just look at that row for accountability. 0 criminal prosecutions. The focus has been almost entirely on giving victims money while completely sidestepping the question of who was actually responsible for the crimes. And what this creates is this unbelievable paradox. You have a society where the government officially recognizes more than 10,000 victims of state-sponsored violence, yet not one single perpetrator has ever been held legally responsible. Think about that. It's like arriving at a crime scene with all the victims identified, but insisting there are no culprits. When you have a gap that big, it's basically impossible for a society to agree on a shared truth of what even happened. So why does all this matter right now, today? Well, because this unfinished business isn't just stuck in the past. It casts a really long shadow over modern Taiwan. It influences politics, laws, and everyday public debates. And we can see this legacy playing out in three really clear ways. First off, the fight over the truth is still very much ongoing. Back then, the state suppressed personal truth by confiscating letters. Today, that same impulse shows up in the constant struggle to declassify political archives. Even though laws are on the books to open them up, getting the complete unredacted truth about who gave the orders, that's still a huge political fight. It's the same old pattern, just in a new form. Control the historical narrative. Second, there's this idea of the banality of evil, the fact that these terrible things were often carried out by ordinary people just, doing their jobs. Because those low-level judges, prosecutors, and executioners were never held accountable, many of them and their families just kept their power and social status. And today, that legacy means you have powerful people, often with direct ties to the old authoritarian regime, who actively work to block historical truth. They try to reframe the whole quest for justice as just a political power struggle to delegitimize it. And third, you can see this unresolved history playing out in public, on the streets. All those fiery debates about removing the statues of the dictator Chiang Kai-shek or renaming streets that are named after authoritarian figures. These aren't just arguments about symbols. They are symptoms of a society that has not yet come to terms with its own past. Every single statue becomes a battleground in this ongoing war over memory. So after laying all of this out, we have to come back to the biggest question of all. What's really at stake here? Why is it so incredibly important for Taiwan to finish this journey? Well, what's the path forward? The analysis points to three absolutely critical steps. First, you have to deepen accountability. That means confronting the legacy of the perpetrators, not just writing checks to victims. Second, liberate the archives. Give the public the right to know the whole truth. And third, take these powerful personal stories and integrate them into education so you can build empathy and a real shared understanding for the next generation. Because ultimately, this isn't about getting stuck in the past. It's about building a better future. It's about strengthening democracy, reinforcing the rule of law, and creating a society that's so strong, so resilient, that a tragedy like this can never, ever happen again. And that leaves us with one final, powerful question. This journey to write a requiem, a final song of peace for those who were lost, it's not over. The challenge for Taiwan, and really for any society that's grappling with a dark past, is to figure out how to finally complete that journey and make sure that every single voice that was once silenced is finally truly heard.